Welcome to the exclusively inclusive INVA podcast. I'm Wynna Monroe, the INVA podcast agent, and today we're exploring the episode titled Cut Admin Costs by 40%. How Neurodivergent Founders Reduced Overwhelm and Recovered Profit. And joining me for this deep dive today is a guest who is right in the thick of this. You know exactly what this kind of overwhelm feels like on a daily basis, right?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me, first of all. But yeah, overwhelm is basically my baseline these days. It's just constant.
I hear that so often.
Yeah.
And if you were listening to this right now, you might feel that exact same way, like you were just constantly behind.
Exactly.
Because right now, if you're a neurodivergent founder, there are probably, I'd say, 15 to 20 hours just missing from your week. And you didn't waste them, you know?
Right.
You didn't sleep through them. They were stolen by this hidden operational tax.
Man, an operational tax, that perfectly describes it.
Right. And if you ever finished like a 10-hour workday feeling entirely just physically and mentally depleted, but then
you look at your to-do list, yeah.
Exactly. You look at the list and it feels like you accomplished absolutely nothing of actual strategic value. You know exactly what tax I'm talking about.
Oh, I know it intimately. It's just this quiet, crushing weight of administrative overload. And, for a long time, I feel like the business world has just treated this as a personal failing on my part.
Yeah, they really do.
Like, the assumption is always, oh, if you're overwhelmed, you just need better time management. You need a new planner.
Yes, the planner myth. But the reality is far more structural, which is why, in today's deep dive, we are taking a really hard look at how this tax specifically impacts founders who are navigating ADHD, autism, executive dysfunction, or even chronic illness.
Which is so needed because the standard advice just doesn't work for us.
It doesn't at all. And we're unpacking a complete paradigm shift here from an INDA perspective. We're not going to offer you another daily planner or, tell you to wake up at 5 a.m. to do ice baths or whatever.
Thank goodness, because I am not doing that.
No one has time for that when they're burnt out. We are breaking down how neurodivergent founders are fundamentally restructuring their operations. We're talking about literally reducing administrative costs by 40 to 78%.
Wow. Wait, 78%?
Up to 78%, yeah.
Yeah.
And recovering up to 20 hours a week, while protecting both their profit margins and, crucially, their mental capacity.
See, that recovery of mental capacity is, I think, the critical piece. Because this admin drain, it's not just a budgeting issue for me or like a minor annoyance. For neurodivergent entrepreneurs, it's an operational failure.
It really is.
The traditional systems are essentially short-circuiting our cognitive processing.
Exactly. And that's why we're exploring the systems today, the hard numbers, and some real-world case studies that show why a completely different structural approach is really the only sustainable path forward. So let's start with the sheer scale of the problem. 15 to 20 hours consumed by administrative overhead every single week. That is half a standard work week just evaporating. How does that happen in your experience? How do you lose that much time without even realizing it?
Honestly, it's because of this massive blind spot in how we measure business costs. If I sit down with my accountant or I look at my profit and loss statement, what am I tracking?
Just the financial costs.
Exactly. The financial costs of administrative work. I see the payroll, I see the software subscriptions, the office supplies. If a task generates an invoice or a paycheck, it gets tracked.
Right. The P&L is sacred in traditional business. It tells you where the money goes. But, and this is a core INVA concept, the money isn't the only currency you're spending.
No, it's definitely not.
There is a second, much heavier cost that never, ever shows up on a spreadsheet, and that is the cognitive cost.
And that is where the paradigm really shifts for me. Because admin work creates these two distinct costs simultaneously. But because everyone only measures the financial one, we're misdiagnosing why we're burning out.
We are trying to fix a cognitive leak with a financial wrench, basically.
That's a great way to put it.
The best way to visualize this cognitive cost, I think, is to think about your smartphone. We've all had that moment where you pull your phone out of your pocket, the screen is totally off, but the device is just surprisingly hot to the touch.
Oh, yeah, and you look at the battery and it's just tanking.
It's draining to zero, and you're like, I wasn't even using this.
Right, you aren't actively making a call or browsing the web, but the processor is just working at maximum capacity behind the scenes.
Exactly. It's the background apps. The phone is constantly checking for new emails, it's updating your location, it's pinging servers for like social media notifications, all these invisible processes burning battery life. And that is exactly what cognitive cost is doing to a founder's brain.
It really is.
Yeah.
And if we break down what those background apps look like for a business owner, it manifests primarily as decision fatigue
Yes, decision fatigue is huge.
and constant interruptions, compounding mental load. Think about, what happens when you don't have a solid system for routine tasks. I'll sit down to do deep revenue generating work, right? Maybe writing a pitch or developing a new product.
The stuff you actually started the business to do?
Exactly. And then an email notification pops up. A vendor needs an updated tax form.
And it seems so small. It's just a 2-minute task.
Right. But mechanically, in my brain, here's what happens. I have to save my current mental state, all those complex creative thoughts. I have to close that mental application. Then I have to open the administrative application.
Which takes energy.
So much energy. I have to remember the password for the tax portal, locate the file, download it, draft a polite email, and send it. And once that's done, I have to close the admin app and try to reload the complex strategy app back into my working memory.
And that reloading process takes an immense amount of energy. It's the context switching that kills you. You don't just jump right back into a flow state.
No, never. I might have only spent 2 minutes typing the email, but I spent 20 minutes of cognitive energy shifting gears.
Yeah.
And when you do that 10, 20, 30 times a day, your mental battery is completely depleted. That's the invisible cognitive cost.
It is the primary driver of operational friction. And there's a downward spiral that happens here. When your cognitive capacity drops, mistakes increase, right? Delays multiply, stress rises. It becomes this vicious cycle.
It absolutely does. As the mental battery gets lower, executive functioning just degrades. You start making minor errors on those routine tasks, which creates more fires to put out later.
And more fires mean more context switching.
Exactly, which drains the battery even faster. And,
Yeah.
the solution isn't trying to just focus harder or cutting corners on the actual work.
No, it's not. It's about redesigning how routine work gets done so it never hits your desk in the first place. But I want to push back on that a little bit because a lot of founders hear this and they think, okay, when the solution is just to hire an in-house assistant, someone sitting right next to me in office.
Right, the traditional move.
Yeah. They think, if I need a file, I just shout across the room. Doesn't that convenience completely offset the cognitive cost?
See, that is the instinct, but from my experience, it actually introduces a totally different, sometimes heavier cognitive load.
Really? Tell me about that.
Well, yes, you aren't retrieving the file yourself, but now you have to manage a person. You have to interrupt their workflow. You have to answer their questions when they inevitably can't find the file.
Oh, true.
And more importantly, you have to manage their payroll, their benefits, HR compliance. You've basically just traded the cognitive load of doing the task for the cognitive load of managing an employee.
Which brings us to a really important nuance. While this context switching and management overhead is difficult for anyone, it is uniquely devastating for our demographic.
Yeah.
For the neurodivergent founder.
Yes, a crucial distinction. For a neurotypical founder, an inefficient admin setup might just be like an annoyance, a bottleneck that slows down growth.
Right, but they can push through it.
Exactly. But for a founder navigating ADHD or autism or executive dysfunction, it is not just a bottleneck. It is a complete system crash.
And the symptoms of this overload are incredibly specific. At INVA, we see a consistent pattern. For instance, hours just disappearing into email management instead of revenue generation.
Oh my gosh, the email inbox is the ultimate trap for executive dysfunction because every single email is an unprioritized demand on your attention.
Right. They all look equally important. And then you have decisions stalling because too many details are competing for your attention simultaneously.
That's the freezing response.
Yeah.
Like when a neurotypical brain looks at a list of 10 tasks, it can usually unconsciously rank them by priority and just start with number 1.
Right, they just do it.
But when a brain dealing with executive dysfunction looks at those exact same 10 tasks, they all appear to have the exact same level of urgency.
Everything is a fire.
Everything. The brain can't filter out the noise. So instead of picking one, the system stalls out completely. You end up like reorganizing your desk or doom scrolling because the cognitive demand of just choosing a task is too high.
And there's this symptom that I think is the most painful to witness, and I see it so often. Routine tasks bleeding into the evening.
Yes.
Because the entire day was eaten up by interruptions and stalling. The founder's sitting on the couch at 10:30 at night, finally doing the data entry or the scheduling coordination that they just couldn't get to during the day.
Which completely destroys your ability to recover. Sleep gets compromised, downtime is totally eliminated.
Yep.
So you wake up the next morning and your cognitive battery is only at like 40%, and you have to face the exact same broken system all over again.
And this is where it gets really frustrating. Because if you go to a traditional business coach or you read a mainstream leadership book,
Hmm.
they will look at that founder working at 10:30 p.m. and they will say, this person lacks discipline. They need to time block better. They just need stricter boundaries.
Which makes you feel so guilty.
So guilty. But how do we respond to that kind of traditional discipline-focused advice at INVA? We reject it entirely.
As you should.
This is not a discipline problem. I really want the listener to hear that. If you're listening, this is not a discipline problem. It is cognitive overload combined with inefficient task allocation.
Exactly. Suggesting that a founder with ADHD just needs to try harder to manage a chaotic inbox is like telling someone with pro eyesight that they just need to squint harder instead of giving them glasses.
Squinting harder doesn't fix the blurry text. This is not a discipline problem. It's a radical reframing. It elevates structure over discipline.
Yeah, the business structure itself, the way the daily operations are set up, is generating more mental demand than one human brain can sustainably process.
Especially a brain that processes information differently.
Right. It's a math problem, not a moral failing. You cannot out-discipline a mathematically impossible workload.
It's like trying to pour 10 gallons of water into a 5-gallon bucket and then blaming the bucket for overflowing. The bucket is fine. It's just the wrong container for that volume of water.
Precisely. And this is why neuro-inclusive operations support is so vital. It addresses the structural failure directly. It doesn't ask the founder to change how their brain works.
No. It redesigns where and how the routine work gets executed, so it aligns with the founder's natural processing style. If you're still listening with us here, thank you for staying with us. Take your time with this part, because letting go of that guilt is the first step. You're doing great. So we've established the psychological and cognitive toll. We know that relying purely on discipline is a losing battle. But businesses run on numbers, right?
Yeah, they do.
If we're going to talk about redesigning operations, we have to look at the hard financial realities of how businesses currently try to solve this problem.
Let's talk about the money. Because when I was drowning in admin work, my immediate reflex was, I need to hire someone full-time. I need an in-house person.
But traditional full-time employees, or FTEs, come with a massive, often heavily underestimated price tag. The data shows that a traditional full-time administrative employee with benefits costs over $3,500 per month.
It's a lot.
And when you break down why it's so expensive, it's actually shocking. Benefits alone make up 32% of employer compensation costs in the U.S.
32%.
Yeah.
That is a massive premium before the employee has even answered a single email for you.
And then payroll taxes add another 7.65% on top of the salary. So you are looking at nearly 40% of the base salary just in mandatory overhead.
And let's connect this back to the cognitive costs we were just discussing. When you make that traditional hire, what actually happens to your mental load?
Right.
For a growing business, bringing on an in-house assistant can actually spike your cognitive load at first.
You have to train them.
You have to train them, yes.
Yeah.
But think about what training actually requires. It requires you to externalize all the implicit knowledge that's trapped in your head.
Which is so hard.
You have to build standard operating procedures from scratch. You have to write manuals. If you are neurodivergent and already experiencing severe executive dysfunction, the task of sitting down to map out a step-by-step workflow for someone else is completely paralyzing.
It's adding a massive, highly complex project to a system that is already crashing. You're installing more apps onto the overheating smartphone.
Exactly. And on top of the training, you now have the ongoing cognitive load of managing their workload, conducting performance reviews, handling the HR compliance, and just making sure they always have enough to do so you aren't wasting that $3,500 a month.
So what is the alternative? Because the work still has to get done. The emails have to be answered. The invoices need to be sent. This is where we see the shift towards structured operations support, which is what INVA provides. And the numbers here are staggering.
Yeah, let's hear them.
Compared to the $3,500 plus overhead for a traditional full-time employee, structured operations support drops the cost dramatically to approximately $1,280 per month.
With zero overhead.
Zero.
No benefits to administer, no payroll taxes to calculate, no HR compliance to worry about.
The margin of savings is incredible. We are talking about a shift of between 40% and 78% in savings compared to traditional staffing. That is a fundamental transformation of your profit margin.
But we have to be really clear about what structured operations support actually is, because it's not just hiring a cheap freelancer online and tossing tasks at them randomly.
Right, because that would just recreate the management nightmare.
It totally would.
What is the actual mechanism? How does an inclusive work system operate differently than just having an in-house assistant?
Well, structured operations support is about systems over individuals. When you engage with a structured support model, you aren't just getting a person, you are getting a pre-built operational framework.
The framework is key.
The communication is asynchronous, meaning you aren't constantly being interrupted all day. The workflows are batched. There are built-in standard operating procedures already there.
So the operations partner intercepts the routine tasks before they ever reach the founder's desk. The management burden is removed from you and absorbed by the support structure itself.
So instead of managing a person, you're plugging into a system that manages the work for you.
Exactly. And that creates immense operational stability. Yes, you get the lower operating expenses. But more importantly, from an INVA perspective, you get fewer cognitive interruptions. Because the system is handling the noise, you get faster, clearer decision-making. And you finally get a predictable workday.
Predictability. I feel like that is the holy grail for a business owner.
It is, because stability is what ultimately protects both your profit and your well-being simultaneously. When your workday is predictable, when your decisions aren't bogged down by 1,000 tiny administrative details, your capacity to actually lead your business returns.
You stop reacting and start directing.
Right. Now, I think to really grasp this, we need to move from the theory and the abstract numbers into real life. It's one thing to say structured support saves money, but seeing it applied changes everything.
Yeah, let's hear some examples.
Let's look at some specific case studies that illustrate this transformation. These real-world examples perfectly demonstrate how fixing the structural issue resolves both the financial hemorrhage and the cognitive burnout.
Okay, I'm ready.
Let's start with a service-based company in Florida. This is a classic scenario. The business was growing, but they were struggling under the weight of that growth. They were facing rising payroll pressure, trying to staff up to handle the volume, but the administrative structure was deeply flawed.
It was probably a very reactive setup.
Extremely reactive. The founder was dealing with constant operational interruptions throughout the day. Employees and clients were pulling them in a dozen different directions.
Sounds familiar.
Right. As a result, the founder couldn't get any of their actual leadership work done during business hours. They were forced to complete routine administrative tasks late into the evenings.
There is that evening bleed again. They are paying a premium for payroll, yet the founder is still the one doing data entry at midnight. That is the definition of a broken system.
Financially, their administrative payroll was sitting at $72,000 annually. That's a massive line item for a system that doesn't even protect the founder's time.
So what happened when they restructured?
They implemented structured operations support. They moved away from the heavy, in-house reactive model and adopted a systematic, neuro-inclusive approach. And the financial result was immediate. Their administrative costs plummeted from $72,000 annually down to just $24,000 annually.
Wow. That is $48,000 in pure annual savings.
Yes.
That goes straight back to the bottom line, or it gets reinvested into growth.
But what I find fascinating is that the financial victory wasn't even the most important outcome. The $48,000 is incredible, but the most profound result was operational. Restoring workday predictability fundamentally changed the business.
Because they could finally think.
Exactly. The speed of decision-making improved drastically because the founder wasn't trapped in the weeds. The ultimate victory was described as the return of mental clarity.
The return of mental clarity. When a founder is managing daily friction, they're essentially looking down at their feet, just trying not to trip over the next obstacle. They're entirely focused on immediate survival.
Survival mode.
But when you remove that friction, when you restore mental clarity, the founder can finally look up at the horizon. They can see where the industry is going. They actually have the capacity to lead.
Let's pivot to the second case study because it highlights a slightly different problem. This is about a founder based in Texas. And this case is particularly relevant for businesses that feel like they have hit a glass ceiling.
Ah, the operationally stuck phase.
Exactly. This Texas founder had everything you supposedly need for success. They had a great product. They have strong market demand. Customers wanted what they were selling. But the administrative work required to fulfill that demand was consuming all the energy needed to actually scale.
They had their foot slammed on the gas pedal, but the parking brake was fully engaged. Every new client they signed just added more administrative chaos to a system that was already buckling. So they unconsciously stop selling. They stall their own growth because their brain knows that more success equals more pain.
It's a self-preservation mechanism. So they realized they had to change the underlying mechanics. They underwent a workflow restructuring, they shifted the routine execution to structured support, and the outcomes are wild. First, they recovered 20 hours of capacity every single week.
20 hours. That is literally handing a founder back half of their life.
Client response times improved dramatically, which makes sense because there is a dedicated system handling it now. And the bottom line result, a 25% increase in revenue.
And here's the most crucial detail of that entire case study, right? The 25% revenue jump required absolutely no additional effort from the founder.
See, that is the part that breaks people's brains. How is it logically possible to grow a company's revenue by a quarter without the founder working harder? It violates the old expectation that you have to put more hours in to get more money out.
It violates the old equation, but it aligns perfectly with the physics of cognitive load. Think about a car engine. If an engine is full of sludge and the belts are slipping, it takes an enormous amount of fuel to go 40 miles an hour.
Right.
If you clean the engine, fix the belts, and remove the friction, that exact same engine can easily hit 80 miles an hour using less fuel. The founder didn't have to work harder, they just removed the operational sludge.
When you remove the friction, the engine naturally runs faster.
Exactly. The revenue jump was a direct result of reduced cognitive load achieved through structured delegation. The founder's brain was finally free to do the one thing only the founder can do: innovate, strategize, and connect with the market. The system handled the execution.
This is the core philosophy of INVA and neuro-inclusive support. You build an environment where the founder's unique cognitive strengths are amplified and their operational vulnerabilities are shielded by the system.
Which is so empowering.
It really is. Now, this all sounds phenomenal, but founders are analytical. You need to justify investments. You need to see the return on investment. Let's dig into how we actually calculate the true ROI of this kind of operational restructuring.
And true to the paradigm shift we've been discussing, calculating the ROI cannot just be a financial exercise. We have to calculate the financial return, yes, but we must also calculate the mental return. If you only look at the dollars, you are missing half the picture.
Let's start with the hard math for the financial return. There is a very specific formula for this. The formula is your saved hours multiplied by your hourly value. You take that total and you subtract your support investment. That gives you your net monthly gain.
So saved hours times hourly value minus support cost equals net gain. It is a clean, objective equation.
Let's run a conservative example for the listener to show how powerful this is. Let's say you save a chunk of time that adds up to roughly 40 hours a month. That's about 10 hours a week. We establish the founder's hourly value at $50 an hour, which, frankly, is incredibly low for a founder, but let's be conservative.
Very conservative.
And let's say the monthly support cost is $500.
Mm-hmm.
So you take those 40 saved hours, multiply by the $50 hourly value. That is $2,000 of value generated.
Okay, yeah.
You subtract the $500 support cost. Your estimated net gain is $1,500 per month. Even with a highly conservative estimate, the investment pays for itself 3 times over.
And the reality is often much more dramatic. There are documented cases where executive assistants and operations partners save leaders 2 to 3 hours daily.
3 hours a day of pure administrative execution is exhausting. Getting that back is monumental. Let's look at one specific documented case. A leader recovered 13.5 hours per week. They valued their recovered time appropriately, calculating it at $8,100 per month in value.
Wow.
When you put that $8,100 of recovered value against a structured support cost of only $1,200 per month, it yields a staggering 575% ROI.
A 575% return on investment. In the business world, if you find an index fund or a marketing channel that yields a 575% return, you pour every dollar you have into it. Yet founders routinely hesitate to invest in operational support, even though the math is undeniable.
Why do you think that hesitation exists, as someone who has lived this?
Because of guilt. Especially for neurodivergent founders, we've been told our whole lives that we should just be able to handle normal administrative tasks.
Yes, that's societal expectation.
We feel guilty paying someone else to do something we think we should be able to do ourselves. We view it as a luxury rather than a strategic business investment.
Which brings us to the second half of the equation. Measuring the mental return. This is how we dismantle that guilt. The financial math proves it's a good business decision, but the mental return proves it's a sustainable life decision.
Exactly. You have to rigorously track the mental return. What does structured operations support actually deliver to your brain?
There are three specific mental returns we need to highlight. First, reduced decision fatigue. Second, improved focus on strategic priorities. And third, more consistent daily energy.
Let's explore that first one, reduced decision fatigue. When you aren't forced to make 50 micro decisions before noon, like where is this file, or what time is the meeting, or how do I categorize this expense?
All those tiny cuts.
Right. Your decision-making reservoir remains full for the macro decisions. Should we launch this product? Should we pivot the marketing strategy? Those are the decisions that actually grow the company.
And that leads directly to the second return, improved focus on strategic priorities. Because your brain isn't constantly context switching to put out administrative fires, you can actually maintain deep, uninterrupted focus.
And the third return, more consistent daily energy, is the ultimate metric for a neurodivergent founder. If your energy is completely tapped out by 2:00 p.m., you aren't growing a business. You are just surviving until you can go to sleep.
Just crawl into the finish line.
Structured support acts as a battery saver. It prevents the rapid drain, allowing you to sustain a steady output throughout the entire day. The mental return is the prerequisite for the financial return. You can't make the $8,100 if your brain is too fried to function.
That is so true. So if you're a founder listening to this right now, how do you know if you are just having a typically busy week or if your actual operational structure is fundamentally failing you? There is a tool for this. It's an operational audit called the Neurodivergent Founder Cost Check.
It's a brilliant diagnostic tool because it strips away all the emotion and the guilt and looks purely at the symptoms of system failure.
We're going to walk through this audit right now. There are 5 questions. As we discuss each one, listener, I want you to answer yes or no in your head. Be radically honest. Question 1. Do routine tasks consume more than 15 hours each week?
This is the baseline volume metric. We're talking about data entry, calendar Tetris, inbox 0 attempts, categorizing expenses. If you are spending 2 full workdays a week just keeping the lights on, that is a structural flaw.
Question 2. Do small administrative details interrupt your focus repeatedly throughout the day?
This measures the context switching penalty we talked about. It's not just the total time spent, it's how that time is fragmented. Are you being pulled out of deep work every 45 minutes to handle a tiny, urgent, but unimportant detail?
Question 3. Do you feel mentally drained by the end of the workday?
And we have to clarify what drained means here. It's not the satisfying tiredness of a good, productive day. It is a feeling of being entirely depleted, running on fumes, experiencing severe brain fog, and being literally unable to process another decision. Like even what to have for dinner is too much.
Yes, that is a huge red flag. Question 4. Are costs rising without a clear operational explanation?
This points to the hidden financial leak. Maybe you are spending more on fragmented software solutions or you've hired piecemeal freelancers to plug holes, but your margins are shrinking and your output isn't growing. The inefficiency is literally eating your cash.
And finally, question 5. Are you delaying growth because the current workload feels overwhelming?
This is the most painful symptom to admit. You know you have the market demand. You know you could take on 3 more major clients or launch that new service line, but you are intentionally holding yourself back. You are self-sabotaging the growth because you know your current operational systems would completely shatter under the weight of more success.
Okay, those are the 5 questions. The diagnosis here is very clear. If you answered yes to 3 or more of those questions, your administrative structure needs immediate adjustment.
3 out of 5 is the tipping point. It means the system is no longer serving you, you are serving the system. The machinery of your business has become a parasite on your cognitive energy.
But I want to pause here and reframe this because realizing that your system is broken can feel like a personal failure. And from an INVA perspective, there's a deeply validating concept we have to inject here. This is not a warning sign of failure. It is a signal that the current system was not built for how this business actually operates.
That reframe changes everything. Failing this audit does not mean you are a bad entrepreneur. It does not mean you lack discipline or drive. Think about it in terms of hardware and software. You have a highly specialized, incredibly powerful neurodivergent brain. That is your hardware. But you are trying to run standard neurotypical corporate operational software on it.
Right.
The software is causing the hardware to crash.
The system is completely mismatched to the brain running it.
Exactly. And the solution is not to hit the hardware with a hammer and tell it to work differently. The solution is to install an operating system that is actually compatible. That is the entire purpose of neuro-inclusive business operations support. It is designed to systematically address these specific friction points. You don't blame the founder for being overwhelmed. You change the system so the founder can thrive.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem, we've looked at the psychology, we've proven the math, we've analyzed the case studies. Now we need the action plan. Because the absolute worst thing we could do is explain exactly why someone is drowning, prove that they are, in fact, drowning, and then not throw them a life raft.
Awareness without action just creates anxiety. We have to provide a clear, practical path forward that doesn't require massive cognitive effort to initiate.
The next step is remarkably simple, and it's designed to eliminate the uncertainty that causes decision paralysis. It's a 15-minute cost review.
What's brilliant about this is what it is not. It is not a 3-hour intensive consulting session. It's not a massive 50-page questionnaire. It is a highly focused 15-minute diagnostic.
In just 15 minutes, this review achieves 3 very specific things. First, it identifies the tasks that are consuming the most mental energy.
Notice the phrasing there. It doesn't just ask what takes the most time. It identifies what drains the most mental energy. A task might only take 20 minutes a week, but if it causes you 2 hours of dread and anxiety beforehand, that is a high-cost task that needs to be delegated immediately.
That is a huge distinction. Second, the review estimates the recoverable hours and the annual expenses you could save.
It moves the conversation from abstract theory to the hard reality of your specific business. It puts your numbers into the ROI equation so you can actually see the financial logic.
And third, it recommends the safest starting point for structured delegation. It produces a concrete operational roadmap. It tells you exactly where to begin to stabilize the workload.
It gives you the blueprint for achieving that 40 to 78% cost savings. It removes the burden of having to figure out how to fix the problem yourself.
But even with a blueprint, I know exactly what people are thinking right now. Wina, I am too busy to figure out how to be less busy. It is the ultimate paradox of overwhelm. When you are drowning, you don't have the energy to learn how to swim. What does all of this mean for the person who is simply too exhausted to even think about hiring help or restructuring?
We have to address the paradox of overwhelm directly. The solution is a concept called the power of one commitment. And the core principle here is crucial. You do not need a complete business overhaul this week.
You don't have to burn your current operations to the ground and start from scratch tomorrow.
Absolutely not. Attempting a massive overhaul when you are already in cognitive debt will just trigger a severe executive dysfunction freeze. Instead, you make exactly one commitment. You choose exactly one administrative task to remove from your plate today. Just one.
And there are 4 prime areas to choose from to make this easy. You can choose email management. You can choose scheduling and calendar coordination. You can choose reporting and data tracking. Or you can choose data entry and file organization.
Let's look at the mechanics of how this actually creates momentum. Let's say you choose scheduling. Managing your own calendar is notoriously taxing. You have to deal with time zone math, back and forth negotiations, and constant rescheduling. Let's say that takes you 3 hours a week, but it causes immense friction.
So you commit to delegating just that one task to an operations partner.
Right. You hand over the calendar. Suddenly, next week, you have 3 extra hours of time, and you have 0 time zone anxiety. You have created your first unit of recovered capacity.
And recovered capacity compounds over time.
It does, because you take those 3 recovered hours, and instead of just filling them with more busy work, you use a fraction of that new energy to systemize and delegate the next task.
Yeah.
Maybe next, you hand over data entry. Now you have 6 hours back. Then you hand over the inbox. Now you have 12 hours back.
You are slowly rebuilding your cognitive battery by removing the drains one by one. You don't have to fix the whole business at once.
Momentum begins with one decision.
Oh.
The system handles the rest. You just have to tip the first domino.
Momentum begins with one decision. The system handles the rest. I can't think of a better way to summarize the journey we've taken today. Let's recap the core insights we've unpacked in this deep dive. We started by confronting a harsh truth. If you are exhausted and overwhelmed, it is not because you lack discipline. Your administrative costs aren't rising because you're growing too fast. They are rising because your operational system was never designed for how your neurodivergent brain processes work.
We established that tracking only the financial cost on a P&L is a fatal flaw. You must measure the cognitive drain on your mental battery because that invisible cost is what truly causes operational failure.
We walked through the hard business math, proving that moving away from reactive, traditional in-house staffing and towards structured operation support can dramatically drop your expenses, saving you between 40 and 78%.
And the real-world case studies from Florida and Texas proved that this isn't just theory. By restructuring, founders are recovering 20 hours a week, boosting their revenue by 25% without extra effort, and most importantly, reclaiming the mental clarity.
The ultimate takeaway here is that operational structure is the ultimate recovery plan. It is the life raft that pulls you out of the ocean of administrative overload.
You do not have to keep treading water. There is a mathematically proven, psychologically sound way to build a boat that actually supports you.
I want to end by looking past the logistics, past the P&L, and past the ROI calculations. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about how to recover your time, save your money, and protect your energy. But the mechanics are just a means to an end. Imagine it is next Monday morning. Imagine that your business operations are suddenly perfectly aligned with how your brain naturally works. The friction is completely gone, the routine noise is handled, and you suddenly wake up with 20 hours of pure, uninterrupted, high-octane cognitive capacity handed back to you next week. What would you actually build with it?
What is the grand idea, the visionary project, or the strategic pivot that you have simply been too tired to execute?
Think about that. The world needs the work only you can do, not your ability to manage an inbox. If this resonated with you, the best next step is to go read the blog titled Cut Admin Costs by 40%. How Neurodivergent Founders Reduced Overwhelm and Recovered Profit. Take that one action today. Thank you to our guest for participating in the episode and sharing your experience so openly.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, the listener, for spending this time with us. If this episode helped you see your business differently, please share it with another founder who might need to hear it. We'll see you next time.